Thanks. So nice to be here. And so I always had entrepreneurship in my blood. So I was that kid in 6th grade who sold you Jolly Ranchers for 10 cents, 3 for a quarter. That was me. And you know, I'll just give you a little bit of my story if I get this slide right, which is I'd been a banker at Lehman Brothers, you know, living the dream, 120 hours a week, and really you know, was kind of thought it was ridiculous that they would have, you know, college graduates stay up all night to, you know, get some numbers out of all these documents, put them in a spreadsheet, and then make some analysis and use my brain. And so I had this idea for Capital IQ. So some of you may have come up, seen that product. So started that business in 1998. Everyone thought I was completely insane. The black art of, you know, M&A, how are you going to automate that? And so I just started building it. And it was really like me and like 12 people in a room, like, you know, 10 feet by 10 feet, and started entering it and building it. And so eventually raised about $40 million from banks to build that product, and, you know, ran it in a very difficult environment. And I'll tell you something, like, I'm here today to basically tell you not all of my failures, but as many as I can remember in 17 minutes. So to save you maybe a little bit of pain on your journey. Sold that business in 2004 to the Standard & Poor's division of McGraw-Hill, and started relationship science about 3 years ago, and raised $88 million to build this business. It's an information service product. I'll tell you a little about it later. But basically, the common theme was I was a banker. I knew the business problem inside out, and so I could develop the product for it. And then when we had a commercial product, I basically became a client development person. And I had all my own techniques and spreadsheets to basically maximize my own personal selling. And that's sort of how I transitioned to relationship science. So inside my own little gift of, you know, weird information mind, it was problems that I completely understood. And so basically started relationship science about 3 years ago, raised this money, spent 2.5 years building it. I raised my money very uniquely, no venture capitalists, all individuals, very high net worth individuals like Henry Kravis, Ken Langone, Stan Druckenmiller, Ron Burkle, other people. And I was getting pretty nervous. For those of you who've seen Capital IQ, it's a monster of a product, right? So relationship science is a monster of an information product. It took 800 people, almost 3 years to build. And I was getting really nervous about last December, because if I hadn't have gotten the product working, I'd have to go into witness protection. I mean, I was scared. So the thing came together, and you know, we started commercializing it in February of this year. And as a testament to our own product, which, you know, I kind of refer to as the Death Star of business development, we've you know, gained almost 300 clients in the first 9 months of selling. It's, I mean, I don't know if this is taped, I don't know what firms I'm allowed to mention, but many of the largest consulting firms, banks, hedge funds, private equity funds, law firms, et cetera. So basically, you know, a question I get asked a lot is what is it like to be an entrepreneur? So basically, it's like getting hit in the face every day, okay? And I would say oh, I skipped my good slide. There's my good slide. It's really tough to be an entrepreneur. And I would say if you don't have an iron gut, you know, I would think twice about, you know, starting a business. It is grueling, and you know, you are every day on the verge of, you know, success and failure are like two sides of the same coin on any given day. And interestingly, it's just a pure piece of interesting information for you. I actually do box a bit, and the best fighter doesn't win, the most relaxed fighter wins. And so you have to be able to not react emotionally to everything. But so these are just kind of little cues to help me remember a few things to tell you about. So one thing, you know, when I started Capital IQ, I used to hate it when venture capitalists would say, what's your market size? And I would say, you know, big, you're a jerk, give me some money. And, you know, you know, and I really, but actually, years later, I came to appreciate this question, because I think, and a lot of entrepreneurs I talk to don't size their market. And,
here's what's going to happen. You start a business, 5 years of your life are going to go by. You're not going to sleep much. You're going to work your butt off. And why do that if it's a tiny opportunity? Okay, so a rule of thumb, if it's not $1 billion global full potential market size, that's me as sort of a larger scale entrepreneur wouldn't really go into that, because if I just get 5% of that market, $50 million is a nice business. If you get 100% of a $5 million market and you have nowhere else to go, it's not really such a great way to spend your time. The thick skin part, which is a little bit of my slide before, you got to have thick skin. I have had so many people say no to me every day of my life. Every investor in Capital IQ said no, okay? Multiple times. And, no doesn't, part of my slide also is, no doesn't mean no. No means not now, maybe later, come back to me, even when they just say no. So really, as an entrepreneur who at that point did not have a success like Capital IQ to point to, had no, real relationships, no real capital, the thing that I did have was execution skills. And so if I saw an investor, and this is actually a good point, what I did when I was raising money is I picked the 5 metrics that I would talk about to investors. And I made sure, no matter what happened, those went up, okay? And so the next time I saw them, I'd be like, this one, and I would talk about it, and you sort of give people, there's this chemical part of people's brain that makes them want to give you money, and they like hearing about things going up. And so, literally everyone said no, and everyone who I thought would give me money didn't give me money. And I'll give you the first outside capital. This is how crazy raising money is. I was running around talking to everybody, and I met this guy, and he says he went to boarding school with the Prince of Bahrain, and he came over to the office, and we spent an hour, looking at this prototype, and he said, this looks pretty interesting, I think we'd like to do something. And the next day he wired me $500,000 without any documents, okay? And I was like, I literally laid down on the floor, I'm like, that's awesome, right? I'll tell you another story about fundraising, sort of like the, chutzpah is you have to have. So, we're raised. So first I'll start at the beginning of the fundraising story. People say, I don't want to raise money from my friends and my family. And here's the story: you're dead. Okay? There are no friends and family. You have potential investors. Full stop. Because if you're not going to talk to people, every person you know, you're not going to raise your money. And by the way, your friends and your family, if you don't ask them and you're successful, they're going to be mad at you. Why didn't you ask me, right? So I'll tell you another fun fundraising story. Is I then wanted to raise a couple $1 million, and I thought this business would be cool to have a bunch of bankers who knew Wall Street, who could be potential clients, and so I basically wanted to get a godfather. Okay, there was a firm none of you have ever heard of called Witt Capital. And this guy, Bob Lesson, had become chairman. He had been chairman of Smith Barney. And I said, I need a Bob Lesson. So what did I do is I called up every disenfranchised senior banker on Wall Street. I literally spoke to Jamie Dimon at his house. Okay? This is a true story. When he had just gotten sort of booted out of Citigroup, I called his office at Citi, and they said he's not here. And I said, do you have a number for him? They gave me his home number. I called. I left a message with his, housekeeper, and he called me back, and we talked, and I asked him if he wanted to come and be, CEO or chairman of my company that has no revenue and 10 people. And he said, he was very gracious. He says, I think I might do something a little bigger, which he did. But I'll tell you, you really have to basically put it all on the line. When I was raising that money, I literally wrote a one-page letter, and I put it in a FedEx envelope, and I sent it to the 20 CEOs of the top 20 banks. And I actually had meetings with probably 9 of them. And it was just, I figured if it was physical, they'd have to open it, and FedEx was important back then. And you just have to leave it all in the field. And I'll tell you about the fundraising. So I then really wanted to raise a whole bunch of money from banks, and like $30 million. And I had a bunch of banks kind of interested, but nobody would take the lead. And so I had this great attorney who at the time gave me tremendous credibility, because he was sort of the chairman of the corporate department at Proskauer. And I said, here's what we do. I said, put together the documents, put a memo on top of it about that there's a closing happening, and send it out in a Proskauer envelope, and let's see what happens. And actually, 2 people funded. It was amazing. And so, Merrill Lynch and Credit Suisse each put in $5 million, and we kind of like mind melded them into investing. So it's kind of quite a complicated process of raising money. So I guess a couple of these other bullets, as I look at my tick down here, is prioritization. I would say this is one of the most important things when you're managing a business, starting a business. Everyone wants to take you in another direction, right? Some potential client, everyone has their idea of where you should go, and you have to think about that. And prioritization isn't really just the order in which you do things. It actually starts with, you make 2 lists, the stuff you're going to do and the stuff you're not going to do. And the stuff you're not going to do has to be bigger than what you're going to do. That's the first stop. Because, if you want to go ice fishing, it's better to hit 100 times in one place than one time in 100 places, and you have to focus. And, now Capital IQ, not many of you may know this, it actually started as an investment bank. We were, built this cool system and thought the way we would make money was be the American Express of the small deal market. And, we're doing these small deals, and literally when I went to go raise that money from banks, guys who ran big banks, like Joe Perella, who's now an investor in our company, was running Morgan Stanley at the time, and who fell asleep in my fundraising meeting, which was how good I was then. But he said, that's kind of interesting, this banking thing, but I'd love to have this for my bankers who work on the Time Warner AOL deal. And so eventually, when I heard that so many times, we made a huge decision to become an information platform. Now here's the story. I probably could, coming out of college, so I worked in banking, but it was sort of I had something in between. I probably couldn't have gotten an interview, at Credit Suisse and Merrill, who were giving us money, let alone imagine that they would all work on this platform and put their documents and work on their M&A deals on it. It was a crazy idea, but we basically went for it. And again, I maximized the credibility of my investors. And I guess one common theme there is I also have sought investors that sort of were useful to my business purpose. Bankers were Capital IQ. I've sort of raised money from a lot of very, people who are exceptionally successful and who've used their relationships to create their career. And by the way, I hustle them every day of the week with, can you introduce me to this person, that person, and relationship marketing. So I'll tell you a little story or two, just a funny story of managing board investors. So I have so many stories, I'm never going to make it through in this, but here's the story. A true story, okay? An investor was going to invest, and we got down to the week before closing, and he stops returning our calls, and we're freaking out, right? And so then about 2 days later, I get a call from the guy who runs the fund. He goes, hey, I understand that we're supposed to make an investment. I don't really know anything about your business. Can you tell me about it? So I'm like, holy crap, right? Like I got to start from scratch with him. So I give him like the pitch, like on the phone while I'm sweating. And he says, okay, we're going to fund. So I found out later that the guy who's going to invest totally coked out Scarface style on the trading desk, like blood and coke streaming, and like basically was fired like while my deal was closing. And true story. And then, so this fund drops an investor into our board who had never been a VC before. Okay, so first of all, Josh, who's sitting over here, is a very good VC. I will tell you that they are very rare, okay? VCs who have never operated a business think if you sell C32 of your model, you're going to double your profits next year. They have no idea what's going on. Okay, so this person had not been a VC, and I'll tell you a story. He was on a compensation committee. This is, this was post 9/11, and we were kind of very, tight on expenses. And I wrote this very clear and concise memo, and I put some schedules behind it that really explained compensation, how we were doing it. And the meeting time arrived, and he was not there. And so I called his office, and his assistant put me through to him and he said, oh, I forgot. And I said, well, why don't we just do it telephonically? There were some other members. And I said, if you turn to page 2, he goes, what memo are you talking about? And so I fish it out, and I told him I sent you this time. And then I start making my presentation. He goes, stop. He goes, you have too many people who make over $100,000. You should fire them all. I swear, he goes, that guy, Kevin. He goes, fire him. I was like, let me explain to you, what his value is and how we're actually paying him a lot less than his guaranteed salary. And he said, I don't care, fire him. And so I said, look, I think we should pause and reconvene this meeting another time. And if I had more time, I would tell you the rest of this story. But oh, okay. Well, it was great. It was. I then had to basically gear up for a fight, and I went around to all my other investors individually and said, I got someone who might be a problem, and I just want to tell you about it, and I hopefully I'll have your support. And the guy then calls me later that week on the phone because I'm trying to work it out behind the scenes, and he calls me up and he goes, you know what your job is? And I said, what's that? And he goes, your job is to do what I tell you to do. And I said, really? I said, I don't think that's the case. I think actually my job is to try to explain to the board or to the various committees what I think is in the best interest of the company. And you might want to check with your attorney about what breaching your fiduciary obligation means when you tell someone that you have authority over them that you don't. Just a little side note you might want to check into. Anyway, it worked out in my favor. And just to cover a few points here is, selling. People say I'm not good at selling. I'm a total introvert, okay? And here I am with you. Seriously, you got to sell. You got a product. You got to show it to everybody and anybody who wants to see it. And, generating revenue is the best way to cover your expenses. And I would say fortitude. I'll tell the two last things, and then I'll kind of do a quick plug for something. So fortitude is, I think the best quality you can have. It is a mountain that you have to move. Everyone in the world, the stasis of it is operating against you. It takes monumental effort, and you know what? And what happens though is when you get that train moving, everyone wants to get a moving train, and you're going to get beaten. You're going to have good days, bad days, and you just got to stay with it. You have to outlast everyone. Okay, so that's fortunate. And I will give you the best piece of advice anyone ever gave me, which is when you're in a hurry, take your time. And to kind of go a little deeper on that is most mistakes I've made, and I've made a ton in my personal and professional life, is when I thought there was a tremendous amount of time pressure and I had to act. And it was really, in reality, it was probably me imposing that time pressure on myself, and I would make mistakes at that moment. So what type of entrepreneur would I be if I didn't plug my company for 3 minutes? And I just want to tell you about it. So RelSci, basically, as I mentioned, is we map together all the most relevant, influential people in the world across an array of industries, everything about them professionally, relevant things about them personally, how everyone interrelates. This is not user-contributed data. This is all publicly available, but we disaggregate it and reaggregate it, and we put it together in an extremely clean interface so that people who sell anything about very high nature can figure out who do I need to talk to, how can I get to them, when I get to them, how can I develop a personal relationship with them. And so just to give you a sense of what that is, a slide or two, is I want to meet this person. I could figure out who do I know in common with them. And we track everything, who your brother is, pictured together, did deals with, whatever the case may be. And so what this is showing is I want to meet Erskine. I know David. He's my neighbor upstate. And they know each other this way. And so I could ask him, hey, can you introduce me? All the relationships someone has, you can see who their family members, education, donations, career, nonprofits, political donations, kind of you can get a flavor for what they're passionate about, events they've attended or are attending, if in case you want to super stalk them. And an example of one is, let's say I'm a young entrepreneur and I really want to go talk to people at Cornell who went to Cornell or in New York City or in venture capital. I could run that search. Of that, I could figure out who do I know, who do my friends know, and then who am I 1 degree from, which is so basically this right-hand screen, the top example is saying, oh, if I wanted to meet Rajiv, I know a whole host of people who can introduce me. So the core idea is in your contacts is a tremendous amount of power. And none of us, we all have dirty contacts. We don't even know where people we know are working, let alone all the extracurricular things they're doing. So we track that for you and allow people to sort of mesh their own contacts up against that. So that's basically our slide. So thank you, and thanks for having me. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, so we have, I think, the ability to pose questions, and you'll have the directions right there on the screen.
Okay.
And I'll kick one off quickly. So you talked about the importance of sales, which is, I mean, you're selling investors, you're selling customers, you're selling potential employees to join you, but they don't teach sales in school. How do you develop sales skills and hire for sales skills if this is so important?
Oh, that's a really great question. I would just say, look, you have to be fearless. I mean, no one trained me specifically in sales. You just have to be fearless, unrelenting, and willing to go to just that point. I guess you have to have high emotional intelligence to know just that point where it's almost annoying, and and be persistent. And you have to look for people. I think people who you also have to understand how to handle yourself with people and be able to deal with an array of situations. And then you just sell your stuff. You got to feel you have a product of value. Talk to people. And by the way, it's a mathematical equation, right? Ultimately, you're going to get a lot of no's, right? And so if 1 in 10 says yes, no is a good thing because I just need 9 more and I'm going to get a yes, right? And so you just have to have, a willingness to go out there and sell. I don't know more than that. It's pretty innate.
It's a mystery, but an important one. Let's see. So a couple questions here. One question is, how did you conquer your introvert nature? Are you an introvert?
I'm a secret introvert. I think that look, the situations that I put myself in from business context required me to develop certain skills, and I didn't know how to sell either when I sold, and so you have to be able to adapt. And I mean, I used to be, I would have made a mess in my pants speaking in front of a group, 10, 20 years ago. And literally, so I think I took a public speaking class and got some, stuff, and here I am. So you just got to do it. I mean, here's another thing. So if you're going to be an entrepreneur, you basically have to eliminate procrastination. And I actually used to train my brain. Anything that actually I didn't want to do, I made it make a red flag in my mind, and that meant I should do it right away. And basically, so you have to adapt to survive as an entrepreneur.
No, and I think entrepreneurship in some ways is a masochistic skill set. And you're just kind of eating yourself to stay at it.
Very true.
I would agree. What major lessons did you take from founding Capital IQ, and how have those informed RelSci?
One, don't take venture capital money. Sorry. Two, I think that, I actually do think that I was very fortunate in that I was able to pick investors. I had my pick of investors in this business. And so I picked people who I thought were incredibly smart, incredibly kind-hearted, and people I wanted to work with as opposed to just had money and I'd be beholden to them. I think, I also built this business a little differently, which is, venture capitalists have a time frame in which they want to invest. And so I had sort of took it in money that had that time frame. And I think that person who I talked about before, part of his strategy as an investor was to make me so uncomfortable that I wanted to get out of that situation, which kind of would make people antsy. And so if a sales situation came, you'd go. In this one, it's up to me and the team to decide what we're going to do with the business. And there's actually no puts, no anything like that people have to control the business.
So you do have investors, though, still?
I do. I got 100 of them, $88 million worth of them.
So how do you interview those investors? What are the things that you ask now to make sure you don't get up in the...
you just meet people and you get a sense of them, and people you like.
Don't give them control, I guess.
Yeah. People, literally it's like, I approached it a little bit, I don't need your money, here I am. I can tell you a great story. I have a lot of ADD billionaires who are investors. If we weren't pressed for time, I would tell you some hilarious stories of specific people and the crazy meetings I had with them.
I'll say that for the off-the-record post-summit chats
that
we all have here.
Yes.
What about one quick question, and then we'll get to another one here. How about So big data is big, and obviously, your latest business capitalizes on all this data that's out there. And then there's the question of privacy and all this stuff being out there. Not only how do you think about that, but also where do you think we're going as a society in terms of openness and transparency?
So I would definitely not call us big data. I would say we're medium data.
Medium data.
I'm going to trademark that. So you're not, if you guys have used Capital IQ, I mean, it is clean, right? The data has to be clean. To get a professional at a, $10+ billion hedge fund to use your product, your information has to be pretty accurate. And so you're not crowdsourcing this, you're not scraping information. And so at Relationship Science, we got 600 people who basically sit around the database. We collect data from tens of thousands of sources, but the way we integrate it is incredibly fine. And there's actually a way that you develop streams of work where people basically go yes, yes, no, no, yes, yes, and they're given all the information to make decisions. So I'm a big fan of medium data that solves very specific business problems for people whose time is very valuable and they will pay for you to help save them time or help them make some money. Privacy-wise, I'll tell you, interestingly, we had a lot of creepy stuff in our product to begin with, and we had some feedback sessions with our investors. We had everyone's kids, we had net worth estimates and things that, so basically anything that made anyone queasy, we stripped out. And for instance, we don't show minor children, we only show children, we actually don't show anybody, their family members, unless they're otherwise relevant to the database out of concern for privacy. So we just tried to be very respectful when we built this product. And I don't know, where are we going? Transparency is, it's funny, Ken Langone, who's on our board and one of our investors and a great guy, and he said, I think actually when our first interview, the reporter said that, and he says, you don't want to be in the papers? He said, you don't want to be in there? It's like, don't get your picture taken, don't give money in your name, don't talk to the press, But it's just, it's the world we live in.
Yeah. We're probably getting more used to it as time passes.
Yeah.
What about, so 5-year goals? Where do you see the business in 5 years?
For me or for the company, my personal goal is to stay upright. Okay, and for the company, stay alive, and look, I think that any entrepreneur, you got a couple of major hurdles. One is, you got to raise some money. 2 is you got to get your product done. 3, you got to get to break even. And then you go from there. And so in this particular type of business, so by the way, I love this particular business model I'm in, which is a annual subscription. If you delight your customers, you don't have to develop the new cool widget next year, the new cell phone. People love it, they keep buying it, it's recurring revenue. And so in this business, if you get to break even, you're basically home free because it just is all, and by the way, it's a fixed cost business with, it's almost 100% variable gross margin, variable operating margin once you cover your costs. So basically just grow the business and hopefully, everyone here, hopefully everybody here, we can change the trajectory of your life, I think. That's my passion, is building tools that help people, do their work better and be better, be their best. And this product gives access to relationship maximization that was like a black art before us.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on the success so far, and thanks for being with us. Neal.
Thank you. Hey, thank you. Thank you.